So this sort of transitions nicely into a conversation we should be having about two things. First of all, when's the market going to turn in the short term? Because it definitely will turn. Trump's not going to like stubbornly ride this to zero. This being risk assets. And the second question is like long term. Like the fact that this happened changes the world a little bit. And what does that mean for crypto? One implication could be that in a world of trade wars and increasing barriers to global trade, like maybe privacy coins like Monero are more relevant, which is long term very bullish for a smaller cap asset like Monero. And kind of where I'm going with that is let's focus on the long term for a second. A trade war is bearish risk assets and bearish crypto in the short run because it just means that prices are higher for people. There's more economic turmoil. Companies, their profit margins thin because they can't pass on all of the increased tariff costs to consumers, et cetera, right? Like all the reasons that are getting priced in right now. But longer term, like if you erect barriers to trade and you're Donald Trump and you're in charge of the United States, whose currency is the US dollar, which is the preeminent global reserve currency of the day, and you decide to start waging trade wars against people, that weakens the long-term viability of the dollar. That makes it less exciting for Canada and Mexico to trade bilaterally with the United States, and instead makes it more exciting, ever so slightly, for them to trade bilaterally with each other, not in dollars, right? Because obviously the dollar is being weaponized a little bit here. So in order for Canada and Mexico to trade with each other bilaterally, in the example that I just mentioned, they could do it with US dollars, and then the Fed and Mr. Trump would have access to pretty much any kind of punishment they want to lay down on those two countries for doing what they're doing, or they could just pick another currency. They're not going to pick the peso because Canadians don't have a lot of use for pesos. Mexicans don't have a lot of use for loonies, which are getting, both of those currencies are nuking, by the way. The Canadian dollar is having a day like one of these AI coins. It's puking right now. Ultimately, you need an alternative reserve currency that's kind of like independent. The euro doesn't really qualify, neither does the yen. Bitcoin just feels like that alternative reserve currency that's just sitting there as a dark horse on deck, waiting for prime time. And these sorts of actions intensify the long-term drumbeat for Bitcoin adoption for reasons I just described. I think they also intensify the drumbeat of long-term adoption for privacy coins, though I've always avoided those because, frankly, I think they tend to facilitate a lot of crime and terrorism, and it's hard to really like get long something, even if the use case is exciting, that's meant for that. So I don't really have a view on Monero, but I could see this scenario being very long-term bullish Bitcoin and very long-term bullish Monero. Short-term, though, I actually don't think this is that big of a deal. I think Trump's going to U-turn this pretty quickly, and I think this opening salvo is just meant to extract a little bit of pain in order to ultimately end up with a better deal. Then, what do you think?
I think that's the classic take that seems to be floating around. That's also my take, is that Trump is obviously using this as a negotiation tactic, blah, 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 blah. The issue is the response, the initial response from Canada and Mexico has been for Canada and Mexico to sort of join arms and sing Kumbaya and say, we won't stand for this U.S. attack on, we won't stand for this. And we're going to administer retaliatory tariffs. That's not a good sign because it could mean that this gets dragged out. I mean, Trump has an ego at the end of the day, and he needs to win. Like this needs to turn into a win situation for the United States. And the question is when does that happen? I think it's very clear that it's way worse. Like tariffs are way, way, way worse for the country that has a higher percentage of their trade allocated to whatever country is administering the tariffs. I mean, Canada exports basically everything to the United States. It is way, 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 way worse for Canada to have the U.S. put tariffs on Canadian goods and for Canada to put tariffs on the U.S. It's just that's obviously true. But it seems like there's some appetite from politicians in Canada to subject their population to this. And what you don't want is you don't want these tariffs to go up and be in place for 3 months before the Canadian citizenry revolts. I mean, like, what forces these politicians to back down?
Wasn't
That's
Trudeau
that's
due
sort of
to
the
get
question.
booted out of office? Like I thought he was supposed to be gone by now. I mean, that's a pretty easy one,
Yeah.
right? Like he just sort of he fights Trump tooth and nail, then he leaves a couple weeks later, and then Poiliev
This
or
is
whatever his name
the
is.
issue. The issue is that Pierre is also in favor of retaliatory tariffs against the U.S. Like this is like a bipartisan issue in Canada that they're all angry at the U.S.
Yeah, I'm left scratching my head too. How about this? Let me bring in an analogy from the oil market. So during the Trump 1.0 administration, he was fighting against a similarly, let's call it stubborn regime, the Ayatollah Khomeini in Iran. He wanted to starve them of cash. He exited the JCPOA unilaterally at a time when oil prices were threatening to rip into triple digits because supply was maxed out everywhere. And so by taking Iran offline, the price was starting to get pretty dangerous for Trump after exiting that deal. So basically he did a similar thing. He was like, fuck Iran. We're going to sanction the crap out of these people. We're going to exit the deal we have with them, the nuclear deal. Maximum pressure, maximum pain. Then oil prices did something that that was bad for Trump, right? The worst thing that can happen to you as a United States president is an energy crisis, like what happened under Biden. Then Libya went out. My favorite warlord, Ibrahim Jathran, started fighting Khalifa Haftar, and Libya lost like 1 million barrels a day of production. Then oil went ballistic. And Trump was between a rock and a hard place. He wanted, on the one hand, he wanted to sanction Iran and, stop out their regime. On the other hand, he didn't want to get basically riots on his watch in the United States and get voted out of office because he caused an energy crisis. So he did a backdoor deal and waived the sanctions for a little while to let Iran continue to export. He acted like the waivers were, because the waivers were fairly public. He did it quietly, but it was still public enough that people were like, wow, Trump's backing down. So he didn't waiver the full amount that was sanctioned. He waived some of it. And then he did another thing, which was just let the rest of it out into Chinese bonded storage without telling anybody. And you wouldn't have known that unless you were in the oil market, which I was at the time, like in the physical oil market. Basically, Iran was selling oil to China. Well, basically storing oil in China in Iranian oil tanks on Chinese soil. And then it was just disappearing from those tanks into God knows where, when, people in the oil industry knew that China was taking oil out of the Iranian oil tanks that happened to be in China and using it in their refineries at a discounted price. So basically it was like this super backdoor way for Iran to sell oil. And Trump did that until the price of oil crashed back down to.
So what you're saying is that he might potentially look for backdoor ways out of this fiasco that he has caused for himself.
Yes. I mean, so like, just to finish the thought very quickly, sorry for rambling. I bet what happens is he does, I bet he blueprints that. I bet he does like a partial walk back that makes him still look tough. And then if there's real trouble, like a super, super under the table thing that most people don't know about, to get the rest of the way back to square one.
Here's a question. Can you articulate exactly why Trump imposed tariffs on Canada? Like, can you articulate what he is trying to accomplish?
No, but I haven't been paying close enough attention. Something fentanyl, something. They're not securing the border well enough. We asked, JD Vance put it nicely. He said, there's a lot of fentanyl coming in from Mexico and Canada. We asked them to stop it. They didn't. And now we're on to the instead of just asking, we're playing tough phase.
Yeah, this is about border security and fentanyl.
Yeah.
And so it's what is interesting to me is how, in theory, easy it is for Mexico and Canada to get these tariffs removed by just making public statements that they will attempt to clamp down on the things that Trump is talking about. And yet the response was so aggressive. And I think that if I'm going to dig deep here, I think what's happening is that countries around the world are nervous and scared of the US right now. They're scared that we're going to economically bludgeon them in order to get our way. And that Trump is actually starting with the quote unquote easy stuff, like forcing Colombia to take immigrants back, which should be pretty darn. Of course, you should let a plane of your own citizens land. That's pretty standard stuff, right? You should probably let a plane of your own citizens land in your own country instead of sending them back to the U.S. And then this fentanyl stuff, which kind of just requires public statements and minimal action.
Yeah.
What's happening right now is a reflection of countries nervous that if they bend here, then it gets much worse.
Do you think it has anything to do with socialism versus capitalism? Because Mexico and Canada
I don't
are
think
pretty
so.
left. Okay.
I don't think so. I think it solely has to do with the idea that the U.S. is moving away. So there's this great tweet that articulates what's happening right now looks dumb unless you put it under the lens of the New World Order, which is for the longest time, post 1945, America was the indispensable country. America was the country that would go out there and it would build up other countries and it would give aid to other countries. And it was the world's policeman and it would dictate policy around the world and it would try to shape the world in a way in its image, right? It's like, I want the world to look like this and we're going to work towards this. And we're going to do this by using our wealth to flush other countries with our wealth, right? We're going to be so good to so many people that they're going to love us. And that's really what we did. I mean, if you think about it, the amount of money that flows out of the US to other countries, specifically so that we can, move forward on our foreign policy, not trade, but like soft power. Like that era is coming to an end. And Trump and his collection of people have decided that now America will stop pushing its image on the world. It will stop trying to dictate what this world should look like in 15, 20 years, and 50 years. It will stop with this soft power. And what it will simply do is cut the best deals with individual countries for the economic growth of its own economy and its citizens. Like, that's it. Like, no more worrying about the rest of the world. It is simply, you're an ally. Sure, you might be, but that doesn't matter anymore. What matters are we getting a good deal out of our relationship? Like the whole idea of consensus building doesn't exist within the Trump administration. That's why he keeps threatening to pull out of like every agreed upon accord. Like the idea that it's good for the world to have a group of nations that act in a certain way and that the US will subsidize those nations to get them to act in a certain way and to support the US, that's over. And so that I think is what people are fighting back